Hello and welcome to Most Marvelous NYC, a podcast where veteran licensed New York City tour guides help you navigate the ins and outs of New York City so you can have your very best NYC experience. We are your hosts, both licensed New York City tour guides. I'm Megan.
And I'm JT. Let's get into this topic this week.
This is a big, tough topic.
And it's of the moment. It's a question that we hear a lot, or we at least hear the way that people deal with their feelings about their own answers to the question, which is New York City safe?
So our topic is New York City safe. And
do you feel safe in New York City?
I personally do. And this is an interesting thing because I'm literally just going off of my own personal opinion right here. When I say that I feel safe, I look the way I look. So you can make whatever sort of judgment or assumptions you want to make based on that. So I look the way I look, and I travel alone on the subway a lot at night. Sometimes I see some pretty creative characters, but I'm still alive to tell the tale, and I still ride the subway alone at night. I wander the city. Sometimes I wander the city with a selfie stick doing live streams. So I feel pretty comfortable in New York City, but I know other people, my good friends who live here, maybe don't have the same opinion or even experiences as me. Do you feel safe?
I do. Knock wood. I mean, I've lived in and around New York City. My family has been in and around New York City, and I feel safe here. I don't think I've ever not felt safe, and I've been here at times when the crime profile has been really different. I was coming to college here in the late 90s, and the crime numbers, we're going to talk about numbers later, were much, much higher at that point in time. And so, I've seen that. I've seen many, many years when people have been touting New York City as the safest big city in America. I believe the statistics hold up that it still is. And for someone like me, I have generally felt that to be true, and acknowledge that there are definitely other people who have a very different life perspective, having grown up in different parts of New York. And we're going to talk about that, and have different experiences.
I think I should also preface this with, I was born and raised in Florida. I went to college in Michigan, so I'm relatively late in life moving to New York City. New York City is very different than my hometown in Florida, which is Palm Beach Gardens. It's also very different than Ann Arbor, Michigan. There are some things that might have shocked me. Was I not super into the musical Rent when I took my first trip to New York City?
La Vie Boheme.
And I really wanted to live La Vie Boheme. And I think that sometimes as a tour guide, we both have guests who come who have maybe never seen somebody who didn't look like them and wasn't of the same socioeconomic background as themselves. And that can make them think certain things, feel certain ways. And of course, it is a big city. And I think that we would be lying to you if we told you nothing bad in New York City ever happened. So
there's 8.5 million people who live here, and hundreds of thousands of people who stream into Manhattan specifically every single day. There's bound to be something that happens, tensions that flare, conflicts that arise, and crime. I mean, there's opportunities for crime when you have that many people around, and certainly people take advantage of that. I mean, I think one of the sad things, though, is that a tremendous amount of violence happens within groups of family or groups of people who know each other, related to each other, etc. So, I mean, that is, when you look at a lot of those numbers, it's derived from things that happen all around, from small towns to small cities. It's magnified in New York because New York is the biggest city in the United States of America by a huge margin. This is one of my favorite geeky New York City facts, and is New York City's population is the size of Los Angeles and Chicago's combined. That's the second and third biggest cities in the United States. So when you think about anything happening in New York City is going to be magnified.
And I think you also bring up an interesting point where you talk about different small towns and different cities. And something that I usually start my tours off with is talking about what New York City is made of. So, New York City is comprised of 5
Mhm.
counties. We like to be different, so we call them boroughs. Our 5 boroughs are Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, and Staten Island. Each of those boroughs has a very distinct personality. But even within the boroughs, something I talk about is Manhattan. Like every 10 blocks, you're going to feel like you're in a totally new neighborhood.
Mhm.
You start out in like the financial district. As you walk north, you end up in Chinatown and Little Italy. Then you end up in Greenwich Village, which has this very eclectic bohemian feel. Then
Much more residential, much older, and you can tell that many of those buildings were built for wealthier people back in the 1800s.
So you have to imagine that each of these boroughs and each of these neighborhoods is going to have a different feel when it comes to
Mhm.
safety, and also different numbers, different statistics when it comes to safety. So something that I guess I would want to ask you is, in terms of a tourist coming to visit New York City, of
Mhm.
the neighborhoods that they are most likely going to at least spend most of their time, if not all of their time in, do we feel that those have a safe feel? Do we feel that those have high crime statistics, low crime statistics? And if not, where are the places that maybe do?
Well, Megan, I'd love to answer your question, but I want to tell you about this other thing first.
Okay.
I'm preparing for the presidential debates.
Okay.
I mean, I think the really interesting thing is, and we kind of talked about this before, what does it mean in terms of is it safe? And I think, first of all, is New York City safe is a very political question, right? It's one of the reasons why we hear about this. The cities have a reputation for lawlessness, for violence, and that's nothing new. This has been something that people have been talking about for 100 years, 200 years, even. We can see narratives about cities like London from over 200 years ago. And wherever you gather big people together of all sorts of diverse backgrounds, there are going to be in groups and out groups and conflicts and debates that are happening. Um, is New York City a sort of a lawless wasteland? I don't think any set of numbers is going to prove that out. And what's really interesting is that there are some cities that even New Yorkers like me think like, well, New York is fine, but if you go to this city, things are going to look a lot different. That city has problems. And I actually was with my family in an unnamed city on the West Coast. And I was telling my son, like, oh, well, this neighborhood might be a little bit like challenging. You might be seeing some things here. He's a young teenager, so I just wanted him to be prepared. And we went, and I was like, well, last time I was here, it felt a lot different, but this is like, there's nothing going on. And I had even been primed to expect lawlessness, open air drug use and sales, and extensive people, encamped on the sidewalks. And, um, you know, I know that it existed there. I've definitely seen it there. It's not necessarily prevalent. It's not necessarily everywhere you go, you're going to see that. You'll find things like that in New York City, but it's not going to be your overwhelming experience. And one of the things that I'm always excited about is I see lots and lots of people who come from small towns in the middle of America. And when we're done, I will often ask them as a group, I say, was this what you thought? Were you worried about New York City? And do you still feel worried about New York City? And the vast majority of people say, this wasn't really what I thought at all. The fact that it was so big was kind of intimidating. It's really busy. I'd never want to live here. It's too noisy. It smells funny. And sometimes that's because of what people are smoking that's not legal back home. And sometimes that's because, there's a little more garbage than you're normally going to find in a small Main Street town in the middle of the country. But by and large, people said that they did not feel afraid and they did not see the levels of crime or the sorts of lawlessness or chaos that they expected here. And that's always really, for me, exciting.
Indeed. I have the same exact experience. I'll often, because I have a sort of bespoke private tour company where people book private tours, and they'll email me a lot before their tour, and I'll often get lots of
I've seen some
emails
of that
from them.
correspondence.
Yeah, I've seen lots of emails from them asking if their hotel is in a safe neighborhood, or they saw a certain headline that made them really scared and they wanted to know what it was actually like on the ground. So I know that they had a lot of fear coming to New York City. And I asked them also at the end of the tour what they thought. And they were like, we had so much fun. All of those safety concerns, they didn't see anything. It wasn't at all what they thought. And it's interesting because I find in my own travels, I have a similar experience. I recently went to Rome. I'll name the city. I loved Rome. I have a whole YouTube video about Rome, so you can watch that if
Okay,
you
San
want on
Francisco.
YouTube. Um, but before going to Rome, it was really interesting because even as a guide, I like to think I know how to research. And
Yep.
I'm watching these videos and they're telling me, beware of pickpockets. There was that viral TikTok
Oh,
video,
yep.
like attenzione pickpockets. Um, and like my mom and we bought these pickpocket proof bags, and we were all
And they
ready.
worked,
I
huh?
don't know. We were all ready to fight off the pickpockets. And I'm sure that pickpockets existed in Rome. Like I'm positive because they exist everywhere. But what we experienced was just the friendliest, happiest, kindest people, and very, very helpful. And we left I fell in love with Rome. I want to move to Rome. If anyone wants to do like an apartment switch in Rome, let me know. So yeah, that's my experience has been the same as yours, with people come to New York City who had a lot of fear at the beginning and then leave like really in love with New York City.
Yeah. And again, there's stuff that happens. I, I don't want to be acting like I have blinders on and that I don't know that things happen. Things have happened to people in my family. Things have happened to friends of mine. They've happened here in New York. They've happened overseas. And it definitely happens. But I think for people who are perhaps watching the news and most of the stories they hear, that there was a shooting on the subway, and they think, well, I'm never going to take the subway now. Or they hear perhaps that there was a non-fatal shooting of a tourist in the Times Square area. These are extremely rare, but they get a lot of attention, for better or for worse, whether it's deserved or not. These are the kind of crimes and incidents that people find fascinating, and TV stations and news stations, and they will run with those stories. So,
They know that that's gonna get the views, and the thing is the stuff did happen, so again, we don't wanna to wear blinders, and, I've certainly been, as I mentioned, I see some colorful characters on the subway, and more than one person smoking one of those substances that might not be legal in other places.
or anywhere.
or anywhere. So I would be totally lying if I was like, "It's Mr. Rogers' neighborhood
Yeah.
in New York City." But the experience that I have with my tour guests is that they usually come and just are in love with New York City and find that a lot of their fears were completely, exaggerated.
And in a lot of cases, even some of the things I listen to, the 24-hour news radio station. I don't know why. I guess it's for the weather. I could ask my little device what the weather's going to be, but I like hearing voices. So I listen and I hear about these crimes. I say, oh, something bad happened. And I go, oh, I wonder where that happened. And they say, oh, it's this place that I've never been. It's a place where tourists are never going to go.
So this gets us into my
Back to that
right?
question.
Of the areas where, so in my experience, the areas where tourists usually are
Mm-hmm.
is Manhattan,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
usually south of the northern end of Central Park. So
Yep.
like maybe they'll go up to St. John the Divine. Maybe they'll go to
Mm-hmm.
125th Street to see the Apollo.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, they're below 125th Street in Manhattan. And they might go to like Dumbo, Brooklyn. They might take a tour out to
Mm-hmm.
Bushwick. Maybe they'll go to Astoria, Queens for the food. They might go to the Bronx Zoo or to Yankee Stadium in the Bronx.
Mm-hmm.
And they are probably not going to go to Staten Island.
Correct.
So
for better or for worse, whether
okay,
Staten Island likes that or not.
So are these areas where tourists typically tend to go safe?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the interesting thing is we have statistics. And the NYPD is incredibly transparent with a lot of these statistics. And I find that really fascinating. So one of the things that I think people can do if they're concerned is you can go online and you can go, I'm going to turn this around for the cameras. You can go online and you can see these reports. And this is the NYPD. And it's a system that they use called CompStat, CompStat. So you can go and you can look this up. And every week they have a new report. And you can go to enhanced CompStat and you can zoom into a map and you can see every single incident that's been logged by NYPD officers across the city. So you can see the types of complaints that they're receiving and calls that they're handling on every block, on every corner across the city. So if you are truly concerned, is this hotel in a good neighborhood? You can zoom in on that area and you can see what kind of things are happening there. But so here's a great little statistic, or here's some of the numbers. I mean, this precinct is the safest precinct in all of New York City. Do you want to guess where this precinct is? Where's the safest precinct in all of New York City? It's got zeros all the way down the line. All the crime statistics from the FBI, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0.
I think that I am going to cheat if I answer this because I think you told me that it was. If I recall correctly,
This is a place that's in the movies as a dangerous place. If you're Kevin McAllister
and Buddy the Elf,
and the Out of Towners and all of the movies
and Marvel. Lots of crazy Marvel stuff happens. Doctor Who.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's like weeping angels here.
There are.
That's very dangerous.
So this, if I recall correctly,
you're correct,
is Central Park.
It's Central Park. It is really, when you look at all of the numbers, this is like week to date. Where's the year to date? Yeah, year to date in 2024. And this was a little while ago. So this is the first month of the year, let's say. The year to date in January, there were 3 robberies and 1 grand larceny, and that was it in all of Central Park. And so that was pretty crazy. Oh, there's one. Well, this is where it also kind of gets interesting. Is that when you look at the robberies, right? 2024, there were 3 robberies. And that represents a 200% change year to date.
Wow.
So in 2023, there was 1. And people love to talk about the statistics. And if you hear a statistic like robbery is up 200%.
That does sound really, really scary.
I would never go into Central Park.
And that's a way, it's interesting hearing you talk about that, because for anyone who is newer here, one of my jobs is I do a lot of content creation. I have a channel called TheMeganDaily, and one of the things we're always working on is hooks. So we use something that's very dramatic to hook you in. So I might say, if I was creating a reel about this, robbery is up 200% in Central Park.
Mm.
And
I've
what you're
seen some
not
people who have videos like that.
and what you're not hearing is that it went up from 1 to 3, where I think a lot of people would automatically assume that the 200%, it started at like 1,000 to begin
Yeah.
with. So
Yeah.
now we've gone up to 3,000, when really 1 to 2 is, or 1 to 3, it's still like 3 too many, but it's less scary in terms of numbers when you think about all the people that go to Central Park
Mhm.
every single
Yeah,
day.
it's like the most popular tourist destination in New York City, maybe rivaling only Times Square.
Yeah.
So Times Square is split between Midtown North and Midtown South, and there's statistics on this too. One of the interesting things about this is I was talking to one of the officers who's a community affairs officer, and he was, because we had a big group that was coming in at the end of last year for Thanksgiving, and he was briefing us on some of the information that he thought we should know that maybe might make people feel a little more reassured. And one of the things that he said was that in Times Square alone, and so Times Square is being defined here by like 6th Avenue to 8th Avenue, 40th Street to 50th Street. And that's a pretty broad swath of Times Square. There's 160 officers there at any given time.
At any given
At any
time.
given time. And that's split between Midtown North and Midtown South.
So if I was on any given block in Times Square, so like right now we're coming to you from the Welcome to Times Square Studios, which is on 43rd Street and Broadway. So how many police or NYPD officers would be on the block where we are right now on
I was
average?
looking at this. I think it's like 2. Like
So 2
every
per
block has 2. And if you sort of think like the north side of 44th, the south side of 43rd, the west side of Broadway, and the east side of 8th Avenue. But then as soon as you cross the street, that next block has another. You could sort of imagine them circling on each block as like all of these orbits of NYPD planets. You know, in a lot of cases, there's spots in Midtown. There's a couple of spots where, you know, I think there's people who have had experiences with law enforcement agencies who would not feel comforted by seeing all of the different law enforcement agencies at a place like Grand Central Terminal. At a place, my favorite example is Penn Station, because there are NYPD officers there. There's MTA, those are the folks who run the trains, the subways, the MTA.
And they have their own police force, correct? So
They have a different division, but then there's the Amtrak police. They're going to be there. There are often New York State police, so state troopers. The postal police are there, and often the National Guard is going to have a presence there. So someone actually a few weeks ago, someone said, "Oh, I was just over by Penn Station, and it looked like there was something bad going on." I said, "Oh, because you just saw a lot of like people in uniform with long guns." So yeah, what's happening? I said, "That's every day. That is what it looks like over by Penn Station."
I get that a lot on my tours as well. And one of the interesting things that I found out, if I understood this correctly, in the Oculus, which is the shopping mall at World Trade Center, it's
Connecting 2 different
underground.
subway lines, the PATH train,
There
right
are
by One World Trade Center and the 9/11 Memorial.
there are often like people with giant guns,
Yeah.
and people are already kind of on alert because it's the World Trade
Yep.
Center site. And I asked one day, like, why are they here? And it turns out that I think it's Westfields, which owns the mall. I think it's them that has the rule that if a certain amount of cash flows through a certain store, that there has to be a certain security in front of it. So you'll notice they're always in front of Apple. And then Sephora. Those are the 2 stores that
Whoa.
that get
I would
so
not
much
have guessed that
cash.
other one.
Nope, Sephora and the Apple store.
I
And
always go use the bathrooms in that Apple store, so I know there's law enforcement outside.
so it's interesting because my tour guests often feel very like on edge because they see it, and sometimes even I mean, for me, seeing a giant gun is scary.
Mhm.
I feel scared. And just knowing that they're there to protect the cash in the Apple Store, that's why they're there.
And maybe those new Vision Pro goggles.
Yeah, so, it's so interesting to learn about the different types of protection that we have, and something that I hope people feel is that they have law enforcement wherever they go. I mean, I know that there are places that have more coverage than not, but to know that, like, the MTA has their own sort of police force that is it Long Island Railroad or Amtrak?
Yeah. Well, I think the MTA police is there for Long Island Railroad. Amtrak has its own police force. The postal I just love having the postal police around. I feel like my letters are going to be very safe. Um,
It's important.
well,
It
I
is.
send a lot of cash through.
Well, I mean, look, I thought that my shower curtain was stolen. And it wasn't. It got returned to the post office. So I don't know if that was the postal police. I don't know who took care of it,
Mm,
but you'll be happy to know I have a shower curtain. So yes, I hope that just in terms of knowing that there is protection for you, I hope that these statistics make people feel a little bit more confident.
yeah, and these are a little bit out of date. So like some of these, but like I'm looking at this. This is up until the 4th of February. So we're from when we're filming, that's about a month off. But I mean, the thing that people really think is, I think, happening in New York City, people think that there's murders all the time, that it's incredibly dangerous. So through the first week of February, or almost the first week of February, there were 0 murders in Midtown South and 0 murders in Midtown North.
So is that all of Times Square? Like
That's
0
essentially all
murders
of
in
Times
Times
Square.
Square, which is
Yeah.
so interesting because just based on the comments on my social media, I will post something. I've been doing the subway art series,
Yeah.
and every time I post something about the 42nd Street Times Square subway station, people comment like, "Oh, if you can even get to the train station without being murdered." But knowing that there were 0
Yeah.
in the first 2 months.
And then this is the interesting thing. So I pulled up a couple of other different precincts, and like, sort of predictably speaking, I pulled up the Upper East Side. It's a very, very fancy, very wealthy neighborhood. And we're talking about from Central Park over, and like kind of roughly from, I don't know, I'm going to say like about 59th Street up. And they had 0 murders too. Um, and so that is another very safe neighborhood. I'm looking and comparing, in terms of robberies, it's same exact numbers as Midtown North. Burglaries, I'm actually surprised there were only 19 burglaries. These are fancy houses.
Well, something this is I hope that
Not
this is
encouraging
relevant.
anybody, but still.
I hope that this is relevant. Um, when I hear burglary or robbery, I really picture somebody like in a mask coming in to break the windows and do something pretty violent.
Mhm.
And I recently did a short about one of those very fancy Upper East Side buildings that a whole bunch of very expensive jewelry went missing. And
Mm,
it turned out that it was like a janitor in the building who would just go into
yeah.
unlocked doors. And while that is horrific and terrible, it's very different than that. It's very different than that image of like putting on the ski mask and breaking in
Yeah,
and
kicking the
doing.
door open and tying
Yeah.
people up and all of that kind of stuff. It is. So I also pulled up some of the neighborhoods that are experiencing higher crime. And even when we compare, we say, okay, we got 0s in the Upper East Side, 0s in Midtown North, 0s in Midtown South. I pulled up 2 precincts that have traditionally, and this is especially you go back to the 90s, the early 90s, 90, 91, 92, when we were seeing over 2,000 murders a year in New York City. Um, these are times when I remember being in the city, and you looked and you saw that a lot of this crime was concentrated in precincts like the 40, the 40th, or the 75th, which is Southeast Brooklyn, and the 75th, and the 40th is the South Bronx, which is sort of unfortunately notorious for crime, But when you look at those numbers, I actually think it's surprising. And I hate to say that because we're going to talk about murder again. And we look at the South Bronx, and there were 2 murders in that precinct and 2 murders in Southeast Brooklyn in the 75th precinct. And when you think, oh, we're going to talk about 2 neighborhoods that traditionally and for a long time have struggled with high crime, I think those numbers would be surprising to people, where they'd be thinking, oh, it's probably 10 or 15 or 20. New York City is so notoriously violent, and it's the South Bronx. I mean, I think that more than maybe any other neighborhood in New York City has a reputation for violence. And still those numbers, I would argue, are astonishingly low. Now, either of these precincts, if you're saying, oh, well, but Jonathan, they're still really dangerous, and those 2 murders are more than the 0 murders that took place by this time last year. And that's really tragic. But how many people are going to be in the 40th precinct who are visiting New York City for 3 days, 4 days a week? I think it's pretty rare. I looked around at the map of the 40th precinct, and of all of the places, and there's some interesting places there, I've never had a tourist ask me how to get to any of those spots. I looked in the 75th precinct, and I know that precinct actually pretty well. I've worked out there quite a bit. There's not a single thing that anybody has ever asked me how to get to. There's things I've gone and done as a longtime New Yorker, a longtime Brooklynite, but these are places where 99.9% of visitors are never going to set foot. And it should not be a concern for the majority of people coming to New York City to visit. That's a different question. Do people in these neighborhoods wish and work for decreases in crime? Absolutely. 100% they do. And they're working on it, and it is a problem that plagues them. But for most visitors, it will not be something that they should trouble themselves about in terms of personally experiencing that themselves.
I think you also brought up an interesting thing at the beginning of the section. You talked about comparing these crime stats to like the 90s, I think, when crime was much higher. And it's interesting because I often hear people talking about how New York City is on an upward swing when it comes to all of these crime stats. And as you mentioned, it might be up from last year, but when you compare it to like the 1970s, 80s, early
Yeah.
90s, it's almost like our crime either really plateaued or went down, and the little bit that's going up is
So this is
nothing
a
compared
great
to.
example. Like, so I have, and again, the NYPD has a lot of data, and they do a pretty decent job, I would argue, of sharing it with the public. So in the 75th precinct, I don't really want to pick on them, but it's a great example because I happen to know that precinct in 93 was the worst precinct in New York City in the category of murders, 126,
Wow.
right?
So
And so
those
compare that to
numbers,
last year, 24.
those
24 too
numbers.
many. But when you look at that decrease, right? So that is a decrease of 81%, 2023 to 1993. You look at 1990, there were 109 murders. And even if you look at 2001, there were 35. So that's a decrease of 31% from
Wow.
2001. So those are significant trends. I think anybody in that neighborhood would be excited to hear that it is continuing to trend down.
Yeah.
It would be wonderful if we lived in a world where there was no violence, right? And there were no conflicts. There was no domestic abuse. There was no criminal enterprises where people settled disputes through violence. That would be a wonderful world. It's not the world that anybody lives in today, whether you live in a small town in Iowa or whether you live in the biggest city in the nation. But I think these numbers still bear out the fact that things are much, much better here in New York City than they've been in an extremely long time. And there are fluctuations week to week and month to month and even year to year. We may see that we trend up slightly this year. But again, I think it's all within context and understanding. I mean, you look at the 1990s, there were still millions of people who came to New York City. It didn't change, right? They did not stop coming. And I would argue with crime continuing to be down. But again, there's a lot of political investment in describing situations here in New York City one way or another. And we have from where we're sitting right now, we could get up and look out the window and see a major television network studios in Times Square. And we could walk 5 minutes and go past 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other major national and international news outlets here in New York City. It is easy to report on stories here. They have reporters on the ground all the time. And so just want to encourage people not to get caught up in that.
That's really interesting to be an informed consumer of the news as well. And as a member of the NYPD press, I do get to see some of what you're talking about. It is really easy for all of us with press passes to run out with our phones, our cameras. We see everything from the giant cameras from the professional news crews to those of us who are reporting with our iPhones. And I feel if I was at home in Florida, I always refer to Palm Beach Gardens, Florida as my home because that's where I grew up. If something similar happened, there is a local news station. I don't have a press pass there. I don't know how many people are running around with their iPhones there to capture anything. So I think that it's interesting to be that informed consumer of the news and to also so you kind of approach this on various levels. There's the fact that we have the major television studios here and kind of the attention of the world
in print news and
and also what
a lot of people with opinions.
And also what you said about being able to analyze those statistics and being able to look into the headline. So when you hear an increase of 200, 300%, you can ask, well, what are the actual numbers? And then also compare it over a large period of time, not just from last year, but what if we go back 10 years? What if we go back 20 years? What if we go back 30 years? If you think about the stock market, like overall, the stocks tend to trend up over a long period of time. But of course, in any given year, you can have a very bad year, or you can have a very good year, a very bad day, or a very good day. But if you wait long enough, they tend to have an upward trend. And it seems like the same is going with crime on a downward trend, knock on wood.
Yeah. And again, some of it is, what is the reality? If you're afraid you're going to get shot, is that a reality? Probably not. Will you feel comfortable here in New York City? Perhaps, perhaps not. It is a really big city. You walk out into Times Square, there are hundreds of thousands of people coursing through the streets. That can be intimidating for people. You may have had an experience that leads you to feel uncomfortable, rationally, irrationally. And so are you going to feel on edge here in New York City? Are you going to feel like all the noise is sort of threatening to your peace of mind and puts you in a place where, you know, that loud noise happens and this person is coming towards you sort of fast and, you know, you think that something bad is happening? That's in a lot of ways kind of a reasonable human response. Does it mean that you're in danger? Probably not. I think it helps for people to be on their toes. There's a lot going on. And, you know, we're going to talk at the end about some of the scams. And that's one of those things. The more you know, the more educated you are about what's going on in New York City, the better off you're going to be. But knowing the reality of it.
Exactly. I've also found that sometimes people, when they come to the city, I've had guests who just haven't really ever encountered a homeless person, someone who is without a home. And while I often hear people say, "Oh, these other cities are so much worse," sometimes if you've never seen someone who does not have a home sleeping on public transportation,
It's a
sleeping on the
little
sidewalk,
shocking.
people can I I have found that for the most part, they just wanna sleep.
Mhm,
They just wanna sleep, they just wanna have food, but I find that that can sometimes get into people's psyche just
mhm,
because it's so different than something that they see at home, and then how things are depicted on the movies, on television shows, on
mhm.
media can really kinda make your imagination go wild and give you a sense of feeling unsafe, in which case, I love the fact that you brought those statistics because you can really go to that website. Is it CompStat?
Yeah, if you just Google NYPD comp stat, they've got maps of all the different precincts, so you can kind of figure out where you're gonna be, especially if you have a question. I know a lot of people say, "Oh, is my hotel in a good neighborhood?" And the other thing that I think is that there are some neighborhoods within these precincts, and the neighborhoods tend to be pretty discreet and small. There's a block here, a block there, that things are problematic. And if you go and zoom into that map, you can see, oh no, that is kind of an iffy block. There are blocks that I prefer not to walk on.
What's pretty wild is I have found every block can be so different.
Mhm.
And there can be a block that is so wonderful, and then 2 blocks so there's an app called Citizen, which
Yeah. Oh, I
might
wanted to
be
mention that.
what which might be something that you are interested in downloading. Essentially, if there's a 911 call, correct, it gets sent to Citizen, and sometimes you see really wacky things like a peacock walked into I kid you not, that was one of the
Mhm.
things that popped up, but it will also tell you, like, there was a car crash, there was an attempted burglary, there was
Well, we just had an incident. We were recording another show, and there were a lot of sirens out there. And we clicked onto Citizen and we narrowed it down. I don't know what we decided on. I think they were either investigating a suspicious package in a vehicle or it was a protest that had a police escort.
actually, the protests, we should just touch on really briefly because again, I think that that's something that's really blown up in the news, and
Mhm.
I have certainly seen the protests,
Mhm.
and I've been in, like, some of the streets got shut down or sometimes, like, an entrance to one of our, like, big shopping areas gets shut down, but again, like, I haven't heard of any actual incidents of anybody getting hurt or
I think it's been a long time. There were definitely some incidents, I would say, during COVID. The city was a
right.
very different place during COVID. That is not the case. I actually just saw a video of something. It was a company that is advertising automobile armoring services. So they showed a video from something that happened during COVID, and I thought, oh, I haven't seen that video before, and that's sort of disturbing. But I knew what the scenario was. This is interesting because the officer that I was talking with was telling us that they have 500 officers on standby, especially during that period of time from Thanksgiving to New Year's, that were ready to deal with protest situations. And so the NYPD, this is the other thing that I wanted to mention. You know, if people are comforted by the idea that there's a significant amount of law enforcement here, there's more NYPD officers than there are FBI agents nationwide. We're talking
Wow.
about numbers in the 30,000s for the NYPD, and that's just over the 325 something square miles of New York City, not stretched out across the United States of America. There's a really huge police presence here, and Manhattan tends to be one of those places where, for the 60 something million visitors, they want to make sure that those visitors see that they're present here. So you will not go far without seeing an NYPD officer
Right.
in Manhattan. Oh, and there's another fun stat
Yeah,
because
please
people ask all
share.
the time, and I know we've heard these questions. We both of us heard these questions. And people say, like, how long does it take for someone to get to you? Right. So I looked this up, and again, there's some great transparency. fire department. People always say, oh my gosh, those fire trucks are stuck. From the time a 911 call comes in and is assigned to when the FDNY shows up at a fire incident is like 5 minutes,
That's crazy.
right? If you are calling 911 for a medical emergency, it's going to take just under 11 minutes for the EMS to get to you. And if it's a critical call to 911 for NYPD, that's about 8 1/4, 8 1/3 minutes to get to you. So it's going to be under 10 minutes, just about under 10 minutes for any one of those calls to get to you. And I said this, I had a group of people from, they were from up in Canada last week. And I said, how long do you think it would take your fire department to get to your house? And they were like, it would not take 10 minutes. It would take longer. We're out in the country. So, I mean, that is one of those perspective shifts. And people look at the traffic here and they imagine that you would be on your own for ages and ages. Now, if I call the NYPD and I say, I heard a weird noise, that is
Well, I was stuck.
not going to be 8.3 minutes.
I was stuck in an elevator in my building, and I actually think that the FDNY responded pretty fast because it was a non-emergency.
Did they hear it was you?
I heard it was me.
It's
No,
Megan of the Megan Daily.
I think I had to go to the bathroom, so I was really upset and kind of panicky. But I really wasn't in there for that long. I was surprised, and it was a non-emergency, maybe 10 minutes. And they were able to come and pry the door open and get me out. And
That's great.
yeah, and like for some reason it didn't occur to me like what a miracle it was that they came in that short period of time for a non-emergency. But that kind of goes to your stats.
This is the thing. I mean, we talk about this all the time. Whenever I'm on a bus, we always see a fire truck going someplace and people go, oh my gosh, this like, how long is this going to take? And then I said, well, the other thing too is that most of the calls are not for fires. They're for people. Oh, I'm stuck in an elevator. Okay, we're coming to get you. I have to pee. All right, well, we're coming to get you. Like, but that's not an emergency. Like,
Right.
there's a false fire alarm in one of these skyscrapers. They have to respond. They have to come. And so you'll hear a lot of these sirens, and a lot of times people think, oh my gosh, all the sirens. And especially for the FDNY, a lot of times it's in somebody stuck in an elevator. It's a false alarm in a big high-rise building. It's not the end of the world and it's not chaos. But they do want to get there as fast as they can. They're not going to take it for granted that it's a false alarm.
Right. So I think that, I love that you shared all of these stats. I think it's such good information for people to have and such a great resource for people to have. Though if we're ready to move on, the thing that I find a lot of visitors do experience is scams. I
Mhm.
find that in many ways, that's really what the tourists need to be more on alert for than
Mhm.
some of these like really scary things that you see on the news. So we do have a bunch of scams in New York City to watch out for.
And there's kind of 2 or 3 focal areas for these scams. They're sort of centered in a couple of places. But before we get too deep into this, we're going to talk about Times Square. I want to talk about a great thing to do in Times Square. I want you to talk about a great thing to do in Times Square.
It's actually my favorite thing to do in Times Square. So the sponsor of this podcast is Welcome to Times Square. They own a giant billboard in the heart of Times Square, and they let you put your a photo or a video of your choice on this billboard, and it will show not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 24 times over a 24-hour period. It will show once every hour for a minimum of 15 seconds every showing. and it only costs $150 for all 24 showings. So it's about $6.50 if I did my math correctly per showing. And if you use the code Megan10, you get 10% off. And I just think it's such a magical way of engaging with Times Square. I remember my first time coming to Times Square. I came because I'm obsessed with theater. I wanted to be a Broadway star. If Broadway still wants to call, I will happily answer that call. Sweeney Todd, cast me. Any rate,
What am I going to do then?
my dream was to be on one of those billboards, and Welcome to Times Square makes that dream possible. And I've seen so many of my friends on the billboard.
You know what? I want to tell you something. I hope you don't get mad at me. I don't watch everything you do on social media.
What?
It's like I would be really busy. I'd never get anything done. But you know, the ones that I like to watch the most, because I kind of know they're all going to end the same way, are the Times Square billboard reveals. They are so much fun to watch because people are absolutely thrilled to be on that big billboard right in the heart of Times Square. You're not on a side street. You're right in the middle of it, right by the big red TKTS steps on the north side of the square. And just the way that people react and respond. And like, honestly, one of my favorites is our friend Gary. And like, he just, the way that he responded, and he knew that he was going to be on that billboard. I mean, I think we even knew that in the video, but just his experience of saying, like, I finally got to be up on this billboard and I didn't realize how cool it was going to be, even as a New Yorker. He said, I didn't realize like quite how amazing it was going to feel to look up there and see my face up on that billboard. It was really awesome. It's a fun thing to treat yourself to also, you know.
Absolutely.
If you want to like announce a fun moment or celebrate your own birthday or something like that. So in any case, there are a lot of great things to do in Times Square.
Visit timesquarebillboard.com to put your photo on that billboard. It's great for birthdays, weddings, bat mitzvahs, bar mitzvahs, proposals. We've seen so many proposals. So yes, it's really, really great.
And you get an indication of when it's going to be. You don't have to just sit there for a whole hour in the middle of Times Square.
And there's a live stream, so your friends and family can watch it at home.
Even better.
But while you are in Times Square, you might want to watch out for some of these scams.
Yeah, it is one of the major places where you're going to find them. And the scams, what is your least favorite scam in Times Square?
I have a least favorite scam. I feel very passionately about this. I do not like the CD guys. So the CD
I feel like
guys,
we even need to, folks, do you know what a CD is?
I'm amazed that they still even get anyone to fall for this, because every single content creator I know creates content about how to avoid them. I've seen it on the news. I've seen it in tour books. Tour guides talk about it all the time. So the way that the scam works is you will be walking down the street and somebody will hand you a CD. And they will tell you it's for free. They'll tell you it's free. You'll be like, ooh, yay, a free CD. They'll then often ask you, you know, what your name is, and they'll sign the CD. And you're like, oh, wow, up and coming artist, my CD is signed. And then they'll say, because I signed it, you need to pay me.
Right, because I can't give it to anybody else.
And the most that when I first came to New York City, I fell for this, and it was $40 then. I've had tour guests this month who had told me before my tour that they fell for it, and they weren't handed a CD. They were handed a card that had a QR code to music on it.
Oh,
and then
how modern.
What happened to them was they were told, you know, this music it's all clean. There's no foul language. It's meant to help people like underprivileged youths.
All right. That sounds interesting.
If you scan the QR code, you're going to help them. And then they're like, well, since you scanned the QR code, you have to donate, you know, $40. And they ended up eventually paying the $40, but then another person came out and said, "Oh, but that's my music. I created the music, so you need to give me the money." And they ended up making these guests just feel so uncomfortable, and they just didn't want to create a scene, and they ended up paying another $50, like $90 for a QR code, and they listened to the music and they said that it was not clean.
Dirty.
They were like, "We were told it didn't have bad words in it." So these CD
There was
guys,
cussing?
yes.
Oh my
So
goodness.
these CD guys,
I mean, so the thing that really frustrates me about that particular scam is that they're taking advantage of people's good nature, right? They're taking advantage of the fact that people want to do right by others. And so they say, "Oh, well, I didn't realize that this was going to be, when you signed it, I didn't realize that was going to be a problem for you. And let me make that right." Or, "Oh, I scanned the QR code and I want you to, to get your money." I think a lot of times people start off that interaction and the folks make them feel bad by implying that the reason why you won't engage with them is because of a racial difference. And folks want to prove that that's not the case, and they get sucked into this and put in a difficult position. A lot of times they'll often try to shake your hand, and as soon as you're connected, they will not let go, and it becomes very uncomfortable. You don't want to be like wrenching your hand out of the way. It's an awkward situation, and most people don't deal with awkwardness in a rational way. They just want to get out of it. And if that costs $20, $40, $50, they would rather just, please. I don't want you to think that I did the wrong thing to you for the wrong reason. I don't want to make this all go away. It's not your fault. It's very cleverly designed to play on those decent tendencies of people who are visiting the city. There's another one, the monks, who will come up to you. They do the same thing. They will hand you something, put it in your hand, and as soon as you take it, they want to charge you for it, and then they want you to write your name down and information about giving a donation to an orphanage in some foreign country. They may be religious people, they may be holy people, but that money's not going to an orphanage in Thailand.
I have
And they're dressed in robes, and I mean,
I've literally seen them like turn around after getting the money, count the money, light a cigarette, and like make a phone call. It's just like nothing else about the way they behave.
They're not
seems
living
to
the
be
ascetic life of
right.
of a holy man.
Correct. So essentially the rule needs to be if someone tries to hand you something, you're going to say no.
It doesn't
Or
matter what they say about you. And a lot of times they might raise their voice, they might follow you. Again, remember Times Square, which is where you're going to often encounter this, it has a lot of police presence. So if you are really feeling uncomfortable, all you need to do is walk towards the police outpost in Times Square, walk towards one of those uniformed officers, walk to the business improvement district officers. They're the BID guys. They're wearing a uniform as well, not a police uniform, but it's a pretty distinct uniform. Walk to any one of those people, and you are most likely going to see that problem disappear behind you pretty quickly.
and another thing, it's borderline not a scam, but it's something to be aware of. New York City has a lot of street performers. Some of these street performers are legit,
amazing, incredible.
They are legit amazing artists. Oh my goodness, mind blowing. And some of them are dressed up in kind of knockoff Elmo outfits, and they walk around.
They are not that amazing, to be honest.
They are less amazing. And their hope.
Wait. I have to tell you this. We'll get back to Elmo's.
Okay.
I was in Times Square yesterday and I saw a ventriloquist. I was so excited, but it was really funny because the ventriloquist, I don't know, what do you call them?
The puppet?
Yeah, but I feel like that's disrespectful. Isn't there like a new name?
Dummy.
It's not dummy. It's a foam sentient creature. I don't know what it is. I feel like we need to give them more credit. She was making fun of people. It was very funny. And I didn't want to be made fun of, so I ran away.
That's a new one.
I know. I was super excited because this guy was really talented. He was on mic and his ventriloquism was really, really good.
So yeah, if you see a really great street performer, by all means, give them a tip. In the subway, there's something called Muni, Music Under New York. They're usually differentiated with like a pink banner behind them.
Big banner.
They are literally some of the best musicians in the city. I mean, when you have, if any of you have heard of that experiment where, there was like this award-winning violinist who was playing in the subway station and everyone passed him and didn't give him any money. And then that night he played a sold-out, concert at Carnegie Hall. I mean, it's that level of musician. They have to audition. Only like a certain number of musicians are given the opportunity to be a member of the Muni program. So I would strongly recommend that you give these musicians a tip because they're phenomenal. But what I want to talk about with regards to the scams are the costumed characters.
Yeah.
Now,
and like you said, not technically a scam, but also preying on that sense of wanting to do the right thing when you're encountered in a certain way.
What this scam or the way that it works, I'm going to use the word scam. The way that it works,
I'm not going to fight you that much,
is these costume characters will walk around and they're hoping that you will see them. You will see Iron Man, you will see Elmo, you'll see Cookie Monster.
Elmo is surprisingly still popular. Do we have the photo that I have of Elmo? I took this photo. This was right after, if you're watching on YouTube and if you're listening, you can always go on YouTube and watch if you really want to see this photo. It is a sea of Elmos. And it's actually, I took this photo right after I ran away from the ventriloquist who I thought was about to make fun of me. And I'm not sure which one this is, but in a couple of the photos, I had my camera way up in the air, like above my head, just so I could capture the whole scene of all the Elmos. And the Elmos were running up to me, trying to get me to pose for a photograph. I maybe pose, maybe pay them. And it's intense. It's really intense.
And that's what they're hoping. They're hoping that you will see them, that you will want your photo taken with them. And when you get your photo taken with them, just know that it's not free. And also know that there's not a set price. They are going to want a tip. So if you get your photo taken with Elmo, Elmo is then going to ask for a tip.
I mean, to be honest, I would not stand in Times Square in one of those sweaty fur costumes for nothing.
They are.
I mean, I would, if I'm doing that, I want to be paid.
They are some of the
It's a side hustle.
hardest working people in New York City. They are out in all different types of weather. And just know that if you take your photo with an Elmo or a Cookie Monster, my advice is you want to settle on a price beforehand. So you would say like, hey, Elmo, I would love a photo. Is, $20 enough, $10 enough, whatever it's worth to you, have that in your mind.
And $5 is sort of the baseline threshold, but there is something to understand about that.
Well, and then the scam aspect becomes this. So the scam aspect becomes you really want your photo taken with Elmo. You've settled a price with Elmo. You're going to take a photo with Elmo. You're all ready. You're posed there with Elmo. Someone's taken the photo and all of a sudden Iron Man
shows up.
Iron Man, Mickey Mouse, Cookie Monster.
Some weird
Godzilla.
Characters you don't even know who they are.
They'll all show up in your photo and they're all going to want to be tipped as well. And you're like, whoa, I only wanted a photo with Elmo. I don't even know who this guy is. I don't really care about Mickey Mouse. I love Mickey Mouse, but not the Times Square Mickey Mouse.
Well, and then often what happens is they will basically sort of form a ring around you, kind of with their hands out. And again, it's one of those situations where you want to do right by them, but you made a deal with Elmo and now they jumped in your photograph that may have made it better, maybe not. And they will make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. All you really need to do is just say, no. I only wanted Elmo. I told Elmo, here's Elmo's money. And you can just walk away.
Precisely.
And if you have a problem, like we said, there's a tremendous number of law enforcement officers in the Times Square area, and they do not want to start a fight with you for something like that. They know that they're going to lose. They're in Times Square every day. Those officers are in Times Square every day. It is essentially an ecosystem in balance, and they don't really want to disrupt it. They've got this side hustle with a minor in intimidation going on. It's minor intimidation, but they're not going to turn this into a federal case.
And then the last scam that I sort of want to talk about is something that we talk about in our Statue of Liberty episode.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that this is the one that the most people fall for. And honestly, I think it's the most detrimental because while it's terrible to be deprived of your money with some of those other scams, I think being deprived of money and the New York City experience that you want when you have very little time.
Yeah, that opportunity to do what you want in that time period that you want.
And this scam deprives you of the opportunity that you want in many cases, as well as the money. And that is the Statue of Liberty scams. So the way that these work is you often find them at Battery Park, although they can be all over New York City. You will often find people wearing vests. They'll try to tell you that they are a licensed vendor for the Statue of Liberty.
They might be a licensed vendor, but that doesn't actually mean much.
The only way to go to the Statue of Liberty is to buy direct through the Statue City Cruises website or at Castle Clinton in Battery Park. If you are buying from a random person in a vest
on the street,
even if they're near Battery Park.
Vest or not.
Yes, they might not be wearing a vest. They might also even show you a badge that says that they have the right to sell. And I'm sure that they do have the right to sell. But what they are often selling is not a ticket to the Statue of Liberty. And it's never a ticket to the Staten Island Ferry that is free. But
always free.
Often what they are selling is just a different boat that might not dock at Statue of Liberty. They're also often upselling. So you're going to pay way more money than you would if you bought direct.
For a while, there were people who I think they were busing you to New Jersey to get on a boat in New Jersey. And it took hours and hours and hours. That was a really bad scam. And people would buy it and they would think, well, I've already spent $100 on this, and their whole day would be gone by the end of it. And it had just turned into a disaster. But I do want to mention something. There are a couple of ways. There's City Pass. City Pass will include a Statue of Liberty option. Some of those big package deals for multiple tickets across New York City will offer it. But again, you're not going to be buying those on the street. It's not going to be someone random who comes up to you. And a lot of times these guys will kind of glom onto you. They'll become your best friends. All they want to do is help. They're going to walk with you. They're going to talk with you. They're going to try to convince you. And, this is the thing. We talk about this in the Statue of Liberty. They will sometimes say something like, hey, look, do you see this line? That line is going to be 3 hours for you. And in some cases, that's not an exaggeration. The Statue of Liberty can get very busy. If you don't need to be on Liberty Island, there may be some other options for you. But the only way to get onto Liberty Island, onto Ellis Island, is through that one ferry service called Statue Cruises, Statue City Sightseeing. And there's only one way to really get those tickets and know that you're getting the tickets that you want. And that's to buy it from their own website. And this is the other thing, too. The wonderful world of the internet will often deceive you. And I've met a lot of people who have purchased guided tours of the Statue of Liberty, of certain museums, and they didn't know they were buying them. They thought they were just buying the tickets. They didn't realize the tickets were a lot cheaper and that what they were buying was an upsell for a tour that a search engine had kind of sneakily placed above the museum, above Statue Cruises, and they just clicked on it. It was the first result that came up. They had a lot of things that they needed to purchase, and they clicked on it. I think I might have done something similar to this before I realized what I was doing in another city. It can be very complicated. You just have to make sure that you've done a little bit of research. And we hope that this is going to help you with that research. And you're going to go into it buying those tickets, knowing that you're in the right place, and hopefully avoiding some of those pitfalls that other people find will kind of turn their visit to New York City in the wrong direction.
Exactly. Well, I hope that this has made people hopefully feel a lot more safe. We do talk about the scams, but that isn't necessarily something that you need to be scared of. It's just something that you need to be educated on. And once you're educated on it, you're like, whatever, I'm just
And
going
to
to
know
walk
what your
through.
options are. Your option is pretty much for all of these scams is to walk away
Yeah.
and to let some of that sense of, I want to do the right thing, be overwhelmed by, I know who these people are. They're preying on my good nature, and I'm not going to let them get away with it. I'm just going to turn around and walk in the other direction. I know that I've done the right thing. I know I haven't done anything wrong. I'm going to have a better visit because of it.
Precisely. All right. Any last thoughts about safety?
No, pay attention. New York City is a big, busy place. You know what's interesting? I am going to give one or two extra bits of advice. There is a scam that my friend, the community officer, reminded me about, and that it's another one of these preying on people's goodwills. One of the things that they're seeing a little bit is that folks are coming up and saying, "I need to borrow your phone to
Mm.
call someone. I've lost my phone." And then they are very good at getting into your Venmo and sending money to someone else, right? If you facially unlock your phone, sometimes that Venmo stays unlocked, sometimes that PayPal stays unlocked. So sometimes if that happens, you can just say, "I'd be happy to make that call for you. What's the phone number?" I'll call them and let you know, or let them know what you need to tell them. But really, one of the things that the NYPD says is, get off your phone.
Yes.
Don't be walking around looking at your phone. It makes you a target. And I hate to say this, not just for visitors, but for New Yorkers too. It used to be that you could tell who was a visitor to New York because they were not looking at where they were going. This is in the old days. They were looking at a tour book about how to get to Rockefeller Center. Now everybody's distracted by their phones. And if you are walking around in a distracted state in a big city like this, it is going to be a little bit easier for people to take advantage of you. So put your phones away, enjoy the city, be very attentive to what's going on around you, but don't be too scared.
Yes. I think that New York City is a most marvelous place to
I
visit.
agree.
I hope that this helps give you an idea of what safety is actually like in New York City. If you found this podcast helpful, make sure that you click subscribe and feel free to share it with others who might find it helpful as well. You can
Yes,
always
please.
find me at TheMeganDaily.
I'm all over the place at KnowItAllNewYorker.
So thank you so much, and I hope you have most marvelous travels.
We'll talk to you soon.